Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 6, Episode 13, presented by Mercantile. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, we're kicking off a series of fantastic interviews conducted at Shoptalk in Las Vegas in the Wizeline podcasting studio, a.k.a. our modified beach cabana at Mandalay Bay. And our first guest is Judith McKenna, President and CEO, Walmart International.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to record Judith. It was a little bit chilly. I think we mentioned that in the interview. Wasn't exactly beach weather, but it was a lot of fun. And she is such a fascinating person. Yeah. And she runs just a little corner of Walmart, just like $100 billion or so, I think. So.
Yeah, and was it 19 countries or something? And it's a really fascinating interview because I experience someone who's got that kind of breadth, not just the number of people or number of stores, but just each market's different, so different, right? So it's very, very impressive, very impressive person, and a great interview. And speaking of great interviews, and I'm sure everyone listening will enjoy your interview on the NRF's Retail Gets Real podcast. They don't actually often interview folks like yourself. Usually they're standing C-level executives. So
folks like myself, what does that mean, Michael?
Well, not sitting retailers. Usually
recovering retailer.
Exactly. Listen, host Bill Thorne. I've met Bill a bunch of times. He does a great job on the podcast. Did you enjoy your experience on the other side of the mic?
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, Bill's a good guy, and we actually were going to record that live at NRF, and that didn't quite work out. So we did it the way we do most of our interviews. I can't say the old-fashioned way, but the remote way. And it was a good conversation. It was fun.
Last chance for anybody who might still be on the fence about joining us in Barcelona at the World Retail Congress. Get yourself a nice discount with our offer code in the show notes. We've got some interviews lined up for that, so we'll bring a little bit of that insight back with us. Now, for those of us, we were talking about this in Las Vegas. A lot more people are traveling these days, spending a bunch of hours on airplanes, including myself. Any suggestions for reading material between episodes of Succession? Any ideas?
Well, I'm going to be a hype man for my buddy Seth Godin. He's got a book coming out in just a few weeks called The Song of Significance, and it's about the future of work and leading teams. And I was able to get a preview copy of it, and I think it's kind of typical Seth, breezy style, very much to the point, very thought-provoking, and pretty quick read. So if folks want to go out and pre-order that, I'm sure Seth would appreciate it, and I think they'll find it very inspiring. Some good ideas in there for leadership.
Yeah, Seth's been generous enough to be on the podcast a couple of times. We'll put a link in the show notes where you can order, get in line for a copy. Coming out when is it coming out? This summer? Is it mid-summer?
May 30th, I believe. Whatever the last Tuesday in May is.
All right, well, let's get into the news. I noticed that revised U.S. jobless claim numbers may be painting a shifting picture. 1 month doesn't make a trend necessarily. What did you think about the numbers that came out?
So we've talked about the strong job market quite a bit on the podcast. We've also talked about how across the last several months, there have been a number of very large firms that have done pretty sizable layoffs, including companies like Amazon. And yet the jobless claims number has been flat or has been going down. And that didn't quite line up. The thought, though, was that, there are many more new jobs being created, and that's just sort of absorbing these layoffs. Well, it turns out that the Bureau of Labor Statistics here in the U.S. redid their numbers because the way they were seasonally, I don't want to get too in the weeds on this, but as I understand it, the way they were seasonally adjusting the number was actually not right. So they went back and relooked at it, and that's actually shown that the jobless claims numbers have actually been going up. Not a lot, but this idea that the trend was either down or pretty much flat, it's now looking like that actually the jobless claims are creeping up. So that was some of the other data that we've just seen makes it look like maybe things are, the job market's not quite as robust as it's appeared to have been the last few months.
Let's talk about one of our favorite retailers, RH. They put their earnings out, and a bit of a slowdown for sure, but it's a well-run business. What did you make out of what they had to say?
Well, yeah, it was kind of a mixed picture. As we've talked about a bunch of times, the home category's been pretty challenging the last year or so, largely because of the pull forward in demand due to COVID, but also just in general, kind of the slowdown in the home market. So RH did show a sales decline, a pretty healthy sales decline. I think it was about 14%. It's pretty large decrease. What was interesting was that they still have really great profitability. Their operating margins are like 22%, which you don't hear very many companies have those kind of operating margins. Now, that is down from a year ago, but still quite robust. So if people are curious, I would go read Gary Friedman, the CEO, and really the visionary behind the new strategies management discussion, because it's pretty entertaining. Gary's not a shy guy, and is a little bit ranty. But the good news for them going forward is they're continuing to pursue opening new galleries. Those are the bigger stores, opening more of these design studios, which are smaller formats for smaller markets. They're still investing behind their hotels and restaurants. And so they're absolutely still full speed ahead, as far as I can tell, in terms of their expansion strategy, which is pretty heavy, or starting to be pretty heavily tilted towards Europe, where they'll be opening a bunch of locations across the next couple of years.
Well, my experience of that brand is less about shopping them in a conventional sense and more about their platform. When I was in New York, I loved their RH guest house, not to stay there in this occasion, but I went there for breakfast a couple of times. Fantastic. Let's talk about Costco. So they've been on a tear. Talk about defying gravity. They've been on a tear for years. I mean, they are an immense retailer. They actually knocked out the LCBO in Ontario as the number one wine seller in the world. Talk about what you see from their numbers.
Well, one of the things that Costco does, this isn't actually an earnings report. It's they do these periodic sales reports, and for the first time in I believe it's 3 years, they had a monthly comp store sales decrease. And not only what you're saying about how they performed so well historically, they're also huge. They're the third biggest retailer on the planet. I didn't quite realize they had gotten to be that big. So they've been, I think, also viewed as a bit, of an essentials kind of retailer. You could argue they've benefited from the COVID period as more people were not eating out and, these kinds of things. So the fact that they are starting to see a slowdown, now it's only 1 month, really kind of spooked Wall Street in particular, and is just kind of part of this narrative. We've got some other data points in addition to the jobless claim numbers that make it sound like, okay, yeah, we're really starting to see a much more tangible slowdown, particularly in these more essential retailers, which is not where we've seen any weakness really in the past year or two.
Speaking of essential retailers, let's talk about Walmart here in the United States versus international. They've put out a bunch of announcements this week, actually covering a bunch of things. What did you make of all the different things that they had to say?
It is a coincidence that we've got a bunch of Walmart news with a great Walmart executive coming on. But yeah, they had, I guess, 4 things that were kind of interesting this year. The big one, I thought, from their investor week, or their Investor Day, I guess you call it, conference, was they announced, and this is hard to get my head around, they believe they're going to be able to add $130 billion in incremental sales over the next 5 years.
Incremental. And on top of what they're already doing.
Right.
Great.
So that is, I think, I believe Target's total annual sales number is just under that. So it's like adding on a Target plus over the next 5 years. And when you think about how seemingly mature and vast a business Walmart already is, that's pretty phenomenal. So that's just kind of mind-blowing. They also, this is a little bit more tactical, but I think interesting is they also very recently revamped their website. And it's a much cleaner layout, and I think it really stands in stark contrast to Amazon's website, which to me is just unnecessarily cluttered. It's actually more similar to the look and feel of the Target site. And it just really presents a contrast between somebody who obviously has a vast assortment they're in all sorts of categories. They have a very big marketplace, but presenting it, I think, in a much more user-friendly way. So it'll be interesting. I still think that at some point Amazon has really got to take on their site design and navigation, because I think it's really gotten almost unshoppable at this point. And then part of their investor day discussion was a lot of the investments they're making in automation and new technology. They've got a very aggressive, as one might imagine, they've got a very aggressive capital plan for technology, but the particular focus was on automation. And one of the things they said is that I'm not sure exactly what this means, but that 65% of their stores will have a large automation component within the next few years, and that 50% of their e-commerce orders will be fully automated. Basically a human being won't be touching the order as it goes through that whole process. So I think some of this would happen anyway, but I imagine a lot of this is being driven by some of the labor challenges and just the advancement in robotics and things like that. And then the last thing was, and you flagged this story about I had missed this, about how they're planning to have EV charging stations added to thousands of their locations across the last few years. So I think that's pretty interesting to see a big retailer really get much more fully behind the EV movement. Yeah,
for sure, firing on all cylinders. So let's move to the other end of the spectrum. Let's pay a visit to the Wobbly Unicorn Corner, where we have some breaking news from one of these SPACs, whatever that means. I don't really know what that means, but I know what bankruptcy means. So what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, I think we flagged this as something that was likely to happen. So Boxed, which is a pretty well-funded, well, it's not a startup anymore, but they were in the business of basically providing essentials, health and beauty aids and products like that. They've had many quarters of decent sales growth, but very poor profits, kind of the story that we've been talking about for a while. And they actually in a pure play way. And so unfortunately they filed for bankruptcy. So we will see whether they're able to get out from that. I think what's tough about a bankruptcy filing for their sort of retail is it's not like they're, say, doing what's probably pretty likely to happen with Bed Bath & Beyond here in the next couple of weeks. It's not like they're trying to get out of all these leases. It's really, I imagine, to get out of a lot of debt. They have fulfillment facilities and things like that. But I think it's a little trickier when you've been hemorrhaging cash to the degree that they have been for the last couple of years to see how they come out largely intact, but we shall see. And then not nearly as dire news, but kind of a similar business model in a way, Chewy.com, which is in the pet business, but also a pure play. They are closing a couple of fulfillment centers, and now they are not performing amazingly well, but they've been growing nicely. They've more or less broken even the last few quarters. So not strong profitability, but not losing money the way some of these other brands that we've talked about have. But I imagine that, there's a lot of, they may be seeing signs of a slowdown and they're really trying to manage their profitability. We've seen quite a lot of, even Walmart has done some pushback or pullbacks in their fulfillment operations, just as kind of e-commerce, just like a reset of the amount of fulfillment capacity, essentially, that's necessary. A lot of people invested kind of ahead of the curve there, and it turns out that volume doesn't look like it's going to be there anytime soon.
You mentioned Bed Bath & Beyond. I was struck reading the news about they're doing all kinds of financial gymnastics that are pretty impressive. I wish they were that creative around their merchandising strategy as around the pre-bankruptcy financing, because every week there's we've got a new deal for our accounts receivable, and we're going reverse stock pulls. And what do you think about all this?
Well, I didn't understand. I think if people go back, or they might recall when we've talked about Bed Bath & Beyond's financing multiple times here, when they first did the deal to stay out of bankruptcy, the $1 billion thing with Hudson Bay Capital, I didn't understand that at all. And turns out that fell apart. So maybe
and then nobody else did either.
Yeah, apparently nobody else understood it as well. They're just holding on for dear life here and trying different things to get enough cash to operate the business. I think it was last week or the week before where we talked about how their sales were down 40 to 50% over last year. I mean, it's just hard to imagine, how you keep a business going with that kind of deceleration. And then on top of it, of course, one of the big problems when there are rumors of bankruptcy is that all your vendors get freaked out.
That's right.
And they don't want to ship unless they get paid in cash. And so it just makes a very difficult situation even more challenging. So that, they've got a great brand in a lot of respects. They have a unique position in terms of being kind of this category killer for the mix of goods that they have. So I think there is a space in the market in theory, but whether they'll be able to navigate through these choppy waters when, it's like, what's the expression? Catching a falling knife, I think you like to say.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough. And, obviously the economy doesn't, it's not like it looks to be a booming economy. So it's very tough. I think very tough environment to raise money in.
Now, just before we get to our great interview with Judith McKenna from Walmart, a quick shout out, as kids would say, to both Judith and Amy, who helped us arrange for the interview, for their patience and being open to the experience of a different location for a podcasting studio by the beach in Mandalay Bay. And for the listeners, instead of hearing the usual kind of buzza background you might hear from some of our other show podcasts, you'll hear a bit of music in the background. So that's because we were on the beach enjoying some of the sun and not so warm weather, but it was still great. So let's get to that right after hearing from our presenting sponsor. There are two types of retailers: those that are committed to transforming at the speed of disruption, and those that aren't. If you're a retailer that implements significant changes by intuition, you may soon join the Hall of Shame of executives who bet the farm on initiatives that ultimately failed, so maybe consider brushing up your resume. But if you're a retailer hungry for a better way to gain useful insights on the impacts of your store layout, design, and strategic initiatives, you need to know Marketile. Marketile is an easy-to-use testing platform that emboldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With Marketile, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. Validate your remarkable ideas with Marketile's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at marketile.com. That's marketile.com.
Well, Judith, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. We're here on a chilly day by the beach, so we're going to try to persevere through this, but thanks for joining us.
Steve, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Well, we're delighted to have you. So we generally like to start out by having our guests tell us a bit about who they are, their professional journey, what their current roles and responsibilities are, which for you is quite vast, so maybe we have to allow a little bit extra time. But yeah, just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So I'm a Brit. I started as an accountant back in the UK, chartered accountant, made my way through an accountant's firm, KPMG, and then went into the pub and brewing industry, which was a little different. After a few years there, found myself at Asda, which was a UK retailer, which was a public company at the time, in finance, and I made my way through finance, and one day Walmart came along and bought Asda, and that's how I joined the Walmart family in 27 years as part of Walmart now. So I winded my career through to become CFO there for 10 years, and ultimately then became the Chief Operating Officer, so a bit of a career change to go with that as well. And then 10 years ago, the then head of international, a guy called Doug McMillan, said to me, why don't you come
Familiar
to...
with his work.
I've heard that name, yeah.
Indeed, he's a good guy. He said, why not come to America? And I was like, do you know what? Okay, and my family, I have 2 kids and my husband, we thought we'll go on an adventure. So we did, and I became the head of strategy for Walmart International 10 years ago, and then moved into the US business to do this little job to do with neighborhood markets, which were small stores. Right. They were big stores to me in the UK. And then look after the intersection of digital and physical. To cut a very long story short, I then found myself as a Chief Operating Officer for Walmart US. So 1.4 million people as a duty of care to, and 4,500 stores, which is quite the most privilege to be able to do that. It's a remarkable job. Yeah. And then 5 years ago, I moved into this role. So I now head up Walmart International. We operate in 19 countries around the world. We have 550,000 associates, and we have 7 primary businesses that we operate. It's just over $100 billion business in its own right. So that keeps me out of mischief, and it's
no doubt.
Huge amount of fun to do it.
Well, just as an aside, I don't know, you probably wouldn't know this, but my business school classmate is now running the neighborhood business, Kelvin. So
excellent, and he's doing a fantastic job. I have to tell you,
he's a great guy. We reconnected after not
how cool
having talked to each other for 25 years.
Retail is such a small world, globally, it's incredible.
Yeah, but so. Just how do you go about, this could be a whole podcast, but just dealing with not only the size of the business, but the diversity, all the different countries you operate in. Just the scale and scope and complexity of that seems enormous. Can you give us any sense for how you've approached that and the kinds of things you've learned in the role all this time?
So the primary thing is to have brilliant teams everywhere.
Sure.
That is the heart of being able to run an international business, because at the end of the day, you're not there. And it's not like an operating business that you've got hands-on every day of the week.
Right.
So the quality of the teams that we have around the world, the experience of those teams is huge. I also spend a lot of time trying to understand the markets in which we operate, not just our businesses, but the markets in which we operate. So the political environments, the social environments, the economic environments, how that intersects, what trade they do with other countries. So you build up a picture of the customer there as well. And there's this really clear fact to me, which is customers are more alike around the world than they are different. And once you understand that, then sometimes managing that sort of scale becomes easier.
Sure.
So great teams, a natural curiosity about each market in which we operate and how they fit into the world and their customers. And then the third thing is just a really clear strategy.
Yeah.
So we have a very simple aligned strategy, which is strong local businesses powered by Walmart. We're not trying to be identical everywhere. We're trying to be local where we need to be, but only kind of different where we absolutely have to be. So that combination and that strategy gives you the flexibility to be able to deal with whatever may come your way, which has been quite a lot over the last few years.
I've heard something about that. It's interesting because I assume that the Walmart business, the fundamental Walmart business model ethos is consistent.
Yeah.
But it has to adapt to some local circumstances. Are there any particular things that have either been particularly difficult to execute, or maybe surprises that you've learned to say, well, actually, this is something for our audience, they might be able, if they operate in different countries, they might be able to take to their own business?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. What we're common is our purpose. We save people money so they can live better, which is kind of our strategy in some ways as well.
Sure.
We are very clear about what we will do, everyday low prices and everyday low cost. That is applicable around the world. So these things that we have everywhere resonate with customers. So the least surprising thing is this point about customers and how you can serve customers. They want trust, they want access, they want value. So we focus very clearly on some of those kind of areas. What surprised me maybe, it was really interesting during the pandemic. So we brought online grocery from the UK. We started it in the US.
Right.
And we had it in a couple of markets around the world, but it was really quite nascent. As the pandemic hit and we had to step everything up, the speed with which, because we had a blueprint for how to do it, we could execute it around the world. In fact, there's a great story in Central America who I think we had on the roadmap 5 years time to start to do this. They stood it up in 2 weeks.
The great acceleration, as our friend Carl Boutet would say.
It's a great way to think about it. And I just wish I could bottle some of that capability that we experienced then, which is nothing is impossible. And there are ways to do it. But that common blueprint for doing things, you tailor it, you have the nuances for the local customer and what that looks like, but actually it lets you execute at scale, which is really what we're all about.
I'll bring Michael in a second, but this is a question I've asked several folks on the podcast over the last couple of years. It's this idea that, why does it take a crisis for retailers to innovate? And so on the one hand, I love that so many organizations took the plunge and discovered that not everything has to be perfect or not everything has to take 2 or 3 years, but does that bug you at all that creating, it's one thing to have that urgency because you're staring in the face of a crisis or you're, just situations force you to take action. But at the same time, there's lots of really good ideas that could have been implemented earlier. I'm not saying in your particular case, but does that I'm not sure what my question is exactly, but is that tension
I know
strike
exactly
you?
what you mean, which is why does it take something like that to do some of the things we do? And I think it's because it's inevitable. Because we all have roadmaps, we all have strategies. The world around us moves at a certain pace. What creates that change is the world changes. It's not just we change, we react and adapt to the world. And I think that part of it is something that we're continuing to refine how we do it. I think the thing that I saw most, and I don't know how your other guests found this, which is the silos within the organization were falling down. And people learned to work collaboratively and together in ways that in my years in retail, I hadn't really seen happen in that way. What I'm excited about is I'm seeing some of that learning stay. And
well, that was kind of my follow-on question is, can you bottle that and rinse and repeat?
Because everyone had, I mean, the one thing about the COVID years, there was a unifying mission. Yeah. We're going to take care of our people, we're going to get through it.
That's right.
And everyone could agree on that.
Yeah.
And let's hope we don't have another unifying mission like that, but kind of manufacturing that kind of same momentum, right?
Yeah.
It must occupy your time.
It does, but I think we already had a good foundation of having the same mission everywhere. Like, this is a purpose-driven company.
Yeah.
And you've been around us long enough to know that we truly have that at the heart of what we do. Is saving people money so they can live better. So that was already there. It was just in what priority order you do some of the things that you do. The piece for me that changed was powered by Walmart. Strong local businesses, I think we'd got there. But the powered by Walmart was still a bit of a push and pull. And what happened was everybody said, no. I suddenly see what the benefit of being global is and how I can leverage that. And that, I'm so fortunate that has stayed with people because we showed what that benefit looks like.
Well, you're here at Shoptalk in Las Vegas. You're going to be on the stage with our friend Phil, a fellow Canadian from Fortune. What are you going to be, what kind of knowledge?
You never misses an opportunity to mention other Canadians.
Never miss that opportunity. Member of the Commonwealth, fellow member of the Commonwealth.
We've already talked about this. I am. We're going to talk a little bit about future of retail, innovation around the world, what this global platform that we have is allowing us to see. So there should be some exciting topics in there to chat through. So I'm excited about it. It is one of those periods of time, now we're back out on the road again, where we get to see not only our own retail, but other retailers as well and see what's going on. So hopefully we're going to touch on some of those things. And I think still this question of how do you run a global retailer? It's part of it.
You've been, not to drop Canada again, but your business has been remarkably successful in Canada. And I understand you're doing some investments in Mexico. So talk about that, how you're kind of leveraging that ethos in Mexico.
Yeah, so I was in Canada recently, actually. The business is going great there. So Mexico is just an incredible market. It's a publicly listed company, Walmex. It operates across Mexico and Central America. They have about 3,700 stores, which gives them a reach in Mexico itself of about 88% of the population within 10 minutes of a store. And one of the things that I really like about what they're doing is they're so customer-centric. Like, the customer and finding solutions to the customer's pain points are at the heart of everything that they do, which means that they have the bricks and mortar stores. They've built that into e-commerce, both first-party e-commerce and marketplace, as well as pick-up and demand for groceries in stores. And they're now starting to build out on verticals of new businesses which serve customers and help find them solutions for the problems in their lives. So think about a payments app, Cashi. It's got well over 5 million users already, and it allows people to pay securely and safely in store and perhaps get credit if they need it using the same process. You've then got a really interesting one, which is the business in Mexico set out to try to figure out how to get more people shopping online. And they realized they were actually solving the wrong problem because customers couldn't get online.
To begin with,
let alone to shop. Their issue was access to data. So they introduced a product which we call Byte, which is an internet and telecom business. It now has over 5 million kind of active users in that as well. Yeah. And they're doing a remarkable job of joining those pieces together. So it started as a how do I get you to shop online? It moved to how do I just get you data to be online? And they have one of the largest MVNOs in Mexico now as well. So this is a great business. It's got a growing economy. You know, Mexico's got 130 million people, and the average age is under 30.
Yeah.
So the growth potential. So we've got a great business.
Which is not true of a lot of nations around the world, right? Some are struggling with aging population or declining population growth, right? So it is a great opportunity to develop.
And we're fortunate, after the restructures of international we did over the last few years, that we've actually centered our businesses pretty much where we can see that there's future growth, both in natural momentums of those markets and of our businesses as well.
So Judith, can we talk a little bit about the role of innovation? I'm curious both how innovation gets, what's the process, how you think through bringing innovation, and I'm also interested in, given the scope you have, what's going on in other markets? Are there innovative markets or are there countries where you're seeing innovation that our audience is mostly North America? We're fortunate to have people in lots of other countries, but maybe countries that other retailers, other members of our audience just be paying more attention to because of things that are happening.
Yeah. So the process of innovation, I always smile at that one. I'm sure everybody's got a different answer to it. And some people have little pods of innovation that they use. Some people have it integrated into the business. Right. We try and approach it by figuring out what problems we're trying to solve. And then we have technologists who think about that. We have operators who think about that. We have merchants that think about that. It tends to come together in some of our core teams, the product teams, around the organization as well. And then we do have some teams who spend their lives scanning. Yeah. Like, what is there out there? Might there be an application to this? So that's kind of the blue sky, not so blue sky. And they bring that back in. And we're fortunate to have some great people who join dots to be able to do it. If I think about markets around the world, one that I think we should continue to pay attention to is India. Incredible country, 1.4 billion people. The government there, you're probably aware, has really made a stand to digitize the whole country. We have an e-commerce business there, and we have a payments business there as well. The payments business is PhonePe, e-commerce is Flipkart. What is interesting is the adoption of digital payment in that market, and the innovation that they are bringing to that. So that platform already has about 400 million users and 36 million merchants connected to it.
The numbers are just...
I know, it's hard to even get your head around.
Yeah, I can go further and tell you that their total payments value that moves through there has just hit the extraordinary $1 trillion mark.
Wow.
And I tell you that, the numbers are incredible, but it's actually to show how when you get an innovation or something that makes people's lives easier, that's connected into the infrastructure of how a country works, then actually it scales really fast. So it's an interesting one for me to think about core platforms that scale fast and what that looks like.
So as you look at technology, are there, beyond, I guess, sort of the obvious things that everybody's talking about, are there particular things that maybe you see more potential in that you don't generally see others in the industry focusing on?
Yeah, I think retail is retail, and I think we all have, we all talk about social commerce, we all talk about, what's the metaverse going to do and what are these areas. For me, this idea of personalization for people, I think is huge. And if you think about for a company that believes in strong local businesses, strong relationships with the individual customers in those businesses becomes even more valuable to us. And I think there is an interesting question on personalization, which is you need data to be able to do that. And then how do you put trust behind that data as well? And how do you make personalization real as opposed to we personalize, you get this kind of thing and you get this kind of thing, and then, like, what is it?
Which is more like gang tackling more than that
meaningful. I make a difference in your life for what you can do. So that's one of the areas I'm particularly interested in at the moment as well. So.
And I imagine part of that is, it's having first-party data, right? It's also having that one-to-one relationship, the ability to connect with that customer on a one-to-one basis. I imagine the membership program is part of that. I guess part of the things that I've observed about Walmart, you may know, I used to work at Neiman Marcus, and one of the things that was great about Neiman Marcus was we had so much of our business done on our private label credit card. We had a clienteling relationship. We had a very big e-commerce business, so we were able to uniquely identify, even before all the Apple stuff. We had that ability to reach a lot of customers and have an enormous amount of data. Whereas the sort of the complaint about a lot of the big box retailers was they didn't have that kind of. They have lots of transactional data, but they didn't have a lot of individual data. Are there particular things do you agree with that as a fundamental challenge? And then what are you doing to be able to connect more directly with customers and leverage the data?
The connection that you're trying to make all the time is the store data with the online data.
Yeah.
So online data we have, verticals data, the new businesses data we have. How do you start to connect that with the store data? And doing it for us in an EDLP way. That is the real piece for Walmart versus probably a lot of other people in the way that we approach that.
Sure.
We're finding different ways to do it. It's not perfect yet. We obviously have a blueprint, which is Sam's Club, which has all of the data, which is, we can see what that can give us when we can do that and how we can serve customers better, but also advertisers better and think that way. So we're still working through how we do that. And I think some of it will come through triangulation of knowing what all of the data is out there. Some of it will be ours, as you say. There'll be other data as well, which not necessarily going down to the customer, you, Steve, but knowing what you do, how you think. Maybe we can
start more relevancy
rather than individual, because you don't want this to be something where people go, oh, you know too much about me. We actually want this to be something that people go, oh, that was really thoughtful of them to be able to do this.
Yeah, sort of the thin line between relevant and creepy we used to talk about.
It's true. And one of the things we talk about a lot is how do you create trust? And you don't ever want to do something with customers' data that you wouldn't want to be done to you either. And I think that is a really good, common sense, very Walmart sense check on how we think.
What's your sense of what the future is going to look like? We've got this sort of soft landing kind of narrative. We've got the recession is inevitable. Obviously, it's not exactly the same in every country around the world. But what's your general outlook, and how is Walmart preparing for whatever inevitabilities?
Wish I had a crystal ball. My life would be so much. I don't know if it would be easier. I think I might just be like, oh, really?
I have one. It's just been in the shop for a bunch of years.
Thank you very much indeed. If you just lend me it occasionally, that would be great. What do I think it's going to look like? I think pretty much for the way the world is at the moment, almost any outcome could come out of this. And I'm not just hedging my bets with that. If you rewound over 3-4 years and asked anybody to keep predicting, I think the social and economic position I see globally is different to anything that we've experienced before. There are elements of it that are the same, but the whole is different. So I think it's difficult to see how that's going to play out. What I would advise, and we talk to all of our teams around the world, is, think about what different scenarios could be and how we would react to it. But we are back at our foundation of what we do and who we are. Whether times are good, Walmart should be there. If times are more challenging, Walmart should be there. And I think the fact that we've evolved the business over the last few years, everybody knew us for low prices, but actually we're increasingly known for convenience as well. So we have a big food business, we have a general merchandise business, we have apparel businesses. So I hope that we fit into the fabric of people's lives and make that easier. How it's going to pan out economically, I'm not sure, but when you know, let me know.
You'll be the first.
Thank you very much indeed.
You'll be the first.
Now that I have your email,
Last question for you. Again, we could have an entire podcast on leadership lessons, but I wanted to, if you could share a couple of them. I was reflecting on what you were talking about, what you accomplished with a large team. So how much time do you spend on people versus operations and challenges, and just one or two things that you would share in terms of advice for the listeners and fellow retailers?
Yeah, so people, teams. Never be afraid to give somebody a job who's bigger and brighter and better than you are. That is just a fundamental in it. And then I have this little equation, which is, I've refined it over the years, which is EQ, IQ, RQ, HQ.
Okay.
So EQ and IQ we all grew up with. This is what you need to be in business.
Yeah.
What I've discovered over the years from a leadership perspective, the RQ, which is resilience quotient. And that is that grit piece, that passion, that perseverance, that piece of it I kind of added as I started to go through my career and we're dealing with more and more complex situations. And then as we went through COVID, I realized that HQ, which is the hope quotient, is equally important. And that's about the inspiration that you give, the belief that you give to people that there is a path through, not only when there's a crisis, but there's a path through to win as a business as well. So EQ, IQ, RQ, HQ is kind of there. And I think, am I in balance across those things? And am I helping my teams be able to balance those as well?
I want to pull in one quick thread and this resilience idea. So I've been told that executives are learning that the young executives that were brought on during the COVID era, the couple of years, feel like they grew up in a very difficult time and they might have more resilience, or they're baked in resilience. It's kind of like, parents or grandparents growing up in the Depression. They know tough times. Do you think we're if we try to get a net positive out of this COVID thing, is that one potential net positive that quotient has gone up?
Yeah, I used to say in our business that generation of leaders that are coming in through behind me, it took all of my 30 years in business to even figure out what to do every day as new scenarios were hitting us. They had an MBA in weeks of the things it took us years to be able to learn. And I hope that does create a new generation of people. And I think when we talk about resilience, we think about the ability to withstand shocks. The dictionary definition of it, and I'm the daughter of 2 English teachers, so I'm big into definitions, is the ability to adapt to change. And that is the piece that if there's a thread of resilience that I hope there's a generation is learning, is the ability to adapt to change. Because creating scaled change, particularly in businesses that have been around for a while, that takes a particular kind of resilience of its own right. So that's what I would think about that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Judith, thanks so much for joining Steve and I in the Wizeline podcasting studio here at Shoptalk. It was real fun to get to know you, and thanks so much for spending a bit of time with us, and I wish you safe travels and good luck on the stage tomorrow.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to both of you.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to drop us that 5-star review. New episodes of Season 6, presented by Volatile, will show up each and every Tuesday. Be sure to tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn, and you can catch up with Steve and me at the World Retail Congress, April 25th in Barcelona. Until then, safe travels, everyone.